We're on this incredible
All
tour
right.
of a troll
We
themed
are
Norwegian
live.
town.
I gotta do this.
What to do?
My headset seems okay, right? This thing was a pain in the ass yesterday when I was trying to work with it.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, all right. And this will notify us here in a second. But anyway, yeah.
Trying to find us on here.
I know. Take some time. Take some time to kick in.
I'm still getting used to the YouTube.
Like everything else in the
there
world.
we
Yeah.
are. There we are. Okay. Hey, Barbara.
I don't see it.
It's on there.
Whatever.
You just have
No.
to sometimes, like I had to like continuously.
Oh, I got it.
refresh.
I gotcha. Get off my back. I got you. Anyway. Yeah, so we get ready to go here. Let the blood flow a little bit.
Yep. Hey, Caleb.
That was fun
Good
this morning doing that polar plunge we did.
Oh my God.
Screw that. You kidding me? Yeah, this is
It
ridiculous
is
cold.
so cold. Way too cold to be outside.
No, but it's colder than your soul today.
Fucker. Ski just said good morning. So he got Lion and Fox yesterday. Yeah, that is next week's episode. So we're trying to.
I assume you mean
the episode.
I assume you mean the book and not the animals, because that'd be a story behind that one.
Caleb said, "Is this live or is it lagging for me?" No, it's live. We are live.
Is it live? I don't know. Who the hell knows? Talk to her. She's a technical expert.
Who knows? The internet might be kind of screwed up right now because the school, or the cold as well.
No, I hope. But Ski, I hope you like that book. I think you will, because it's for anybody who's read Lion and the Fox. It's like a spy novel that turns into a pirate book. It just, and what's cool about it is just how accurate it is, but how it reads like it's a fiction. Like there are so many times that I had to catch myself and say, this is actually real. This isn't thing. Yeah. And you'll have those moments where you'll be like, why the hell do I not know more about this? Why? Well, why isn't Thomas Dudley a household name? How is James Bullock not one of those history villains or heroes, depending on where you're from? It's just fascinating. And having Alex on, that episode will drop next week. So we had a great time talking with him, and that was a good time. And then he's going to be on the book club. He's got a very British accent. But
yeah, it's like a subtle accent. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. It's subtle because I'm Canadian.
Between you and him, it sounded like a Bostonian, a Canadian, and a Brit walk into a bar. That's what it sounded like.
Good morning, Lynn.
Tea time with Alex. That was fun.
Good morning. Yeah, Caleb said reading Celsius makes it colder. It's just true.
Yeah. Well, we went outside today and we did that the boiled water thing, where you put the boiled water, you throw it, and it turns to steam instantly. And that was pretty cool.
There's like steam coming off the ocean, like the ocean mist or whatever.
I might be a wizard. I don't know.
Wow.
I might be. That was pretty cool. That was a good time. I'm glad we did that.
It was. Yeah, a few people. There's 14 people on here. That's awesome.
No, it's good. It's good.
Good morning,
to get people
David.
On, but it was good. It was neat. So yeah, so read the book. That'll be cool. It's an easy book to read. I mean, you can.
Yeah, Rob Dell's on here. He said he's reading it. It's like a novel, and he agrees with you. Barbara mentioned, she said, you guys mentioned Free State of Jones last week. I've seen it before, but we watched it. Was that the battle at the beginning, October 1862, Corinth? I don't think it was stated, or I missed it. Was that Corinth?
No, I think it was Corinth.
Yeah,
and that was like one of the better beginning battle scenes, because it's pretty graphic. And that movie takes liberties like all movies do. But I think what it did was, when I went to see that in the theater, I ducked out of work one day, Mary, in the afternoon. Don't tell anybody. In a matinee one time, and there was this family who was from Mississippi, sitting a couple rows behind us, and talking about how there were Union counties in Mississippi, Alabama, and how the Confederates had to go around those when they were marching out. And that surprised a lot of people. They down south, people who live down there know it more than people do here. But just like there were Confederate pockets of support here in the north, to KGC, people like that. And so the movie does tell a good story.
It does.
Matthew McConaughey driving in that Lincoln at the beginning was kind of weird.
My God.
I was not a fan of that, but no, it was a good movie. That was a good one.
Morning, Lisa. Yeah, and speaking of speaking of Civil War movies and documentaries, we watched one. It was recommended to us by our friend Lisa, who's on here. We watched one last night. It's on Amazon Prime. It's about the Sultana, and it was really good.
Yeah, Sultana, it was overshadowed April 65. I don't know if you know this, Mary. A lot of stuff happened April of 65.
No kidding. Well, they
It's 18.
specifically mentioned, and we were talking about this as well, but they specifically mention, when the Sultana happens, it's the day, I think it's the day after Booth is killed in
April 27th, the other day
April
after.
27th. So it completely gets overshadowed. But that's like a tragic story. And it, unfortunately, it gets like, it is one of the greatest maritime disaster, or it is the greatest maritime disaster.
It's the greatest in
US,
American
right?
history. I mean,
it's overshadowed by that little thing called the Titanic.
Well, yeah, 2,500 people. And what's sad about the people, the story of the Sultana was, it was a situation where it was because of greed and, putting too many people on the boat. A guy named Reuben Hatch was they're trying to sail these Union troops up the Mississippi out of Vicksburg to head back to Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. I don't know if I want to go back to Ohio, but that's where they were going. And they overdid it, and there was too many. The boiler was screwed up, and it ended up blowing up. And it's really sad because a lot of these people were Andersonville veterans who survived the battle, who are basically skeletons, and a lot of them were just blew up instantly. A lot of them drowned in the water. 2,500 people, were on that boat. 1,500 died, and it's the greatest maritime disaster in American history, more than the Titanic, which also happened in April.
Yeah, and there was one, wasn't there? There was one person who was on the Sultana, and they passed away the day the Titanic sank.
Yeah, that's
it was like it was like really creepy. Lynn said she's really enjoying the line in the Fox. Anyone else noticed all the big SAT words in it? Yeah, Alexander Rose has a really interesting writing style. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, he'll make your head hurt. And the funny part about Alex is that's how he talks.
It is
too.
Yeah.
Is he's the episode we did with him will drop. We did it the other day. We'll drop next week.
Yeah.
And then we'll have him on the book club. But I was surprised. I don't know why I was surprised by that. I just was. But he has a solid British accent. But he knows his stuff. And this is a guy who has written books on World War II, Civil War, Rev War. Obviously, anybody who's seen that TV show Turn, he's the writer of the producer of that. And he's a very easygoing guy. And we had him on for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, it was great. It was so. It was
the fella can talk. I mean, he can talk.
He's very well. Like it was so interesting talking to him about it. Lisa mentions there were so many Union soldiers at Sultana from Andersonville prison. Caleb mentions that there was a relative on the Sultana, and it is a very interesting, it's a very sad story. Like they had a picture of how overloaded it was and stuff, and it was one of those things where it was so overloaded, the engine had to work harder, so they had to put more coal in it, and then the boiler explodes. But
they're also getting paid by the head to get them back too.
Yeah,
it was agreed thing.
But the interesting thing was, like, you had the boiler stuff happening on these boats. It was happening like a few times a month. One of them would like randomly explode. So they weren't exactly like a safe method of transportation, but there is some parallels to the Titanic with it as well. Just like, too many people. And I mean, Sultana didn't have lifeboats, but there was a lot that like went on that, I don't know. And I find it obviously, I mean, Titanic's a terrible disaster, but Sultana gets completely overshadowed by it. And obviously overshadowed by everything else that's going on in April of 1865. Okay, Andrea Quinn, good morning from frozen Rockport. Yeah, is that hot enough for you there?
Hey, Andrew, did you see the sea smoke today? We could see it from the deck here in Plymouth. Sea smoke is a pretty cool thing to see when it's this cold. It's pretty neat. Has that end of the world type, I feel. Yeah. But I guess it's gonna be warm. It's gonna be 50s here this week. Everybody's gonna have a cold by the end of the week.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, with all the up and down weather and stuff. But yeah, the Sultana documentary, and I put it in the chat, just that it is on Amazon Prime for anyone interested. It's definitely worth checking out. It's about 90 minutes long. So thank you, Lisa, for that recommendation. It was really, really interesting. It was very good. Yeah.
I hope we have a lot of people in the book club when Alex Rose is on, because I think we will. Because I think people will he might get 2 questions in, because he'll answer. He's one of these long-winded dudes.
He's like Kent Masterson Brown. Like he tells
he
tells a story. And then the book after that, which I started reading, I downloaded it, just kind of the ebook copy of it from Boston Public Library is The Real Horse Soldiers by Western Theater Tim Smith. So he will be on in April for that. So that's pretty cool.
No, and yeah, that's a good stuff. And obviously, Ben Grierson's story, going through Mississippi, is one of those ones. We said before, part of that brilliant U.S. Grand campaign in Vicksburg, landing at Bruinsburg and then cutting through and going to Jackson and coming through the Savannah side of Vicksburg. It's a brilliant campaign, and if you don't know the story of Grierson's cavalry, it's definitely one you want to study, because it's a brilliant thing, and one of those things that just had to be done. And then we go and there's a lot of stuff we got to talk about too, because February is a big Civil War month.
It is. I was going and looking it up. So we obviously no new episode this week, but we did re-release our episode that we recorded on Battle of Olustee. Not only is it a battle that is fought in February of 1864 in Florida, but it is also a battle that has U.S. colored troops at it. The 54th Mass is there as well, and we thought for Black History Month that we've got a few episodes about that, so we re-released that this morning, so that's there to listen to. And Olustee's are really it's another one of these, it's kind of like the Sultana, it's like the Lion and the Fox, that there's all these interesting characters that they don't get talked about a lot, who is his name, Seymour.
Well, Truman Seymour for the Union against Joseph Finnegan. It sounds like a bar fight in Southie here in Boston, to be honest. But this is a situation, and people, Florida, it was a big state at the time. It really wasn't inhabited. It was mostly, there was some good oceanfront property to be had by there. Most of the people were in the Jacksonville area, Panhandle, and most of the soldiers that came out of the Confederate, a heavy Confederate state, but most of them were sent elsewhere. Lewis Powell, Second Florida, that famous story with Gettysburg, with the Lincoln assassination came from there. But you have a situation where you have in Pensacola, the Union's going to hold a fort from the beginning, and they're going to basically, this Truman Seymour is going to be a aggressive fellow. He's the Leroy Jenkins of this battle, where he's told to stay where he is.
And he jumps out ahead. He
just goes ahead, ends up fighting Finnegan's guys. It ends up being a really good battle to study. But you've got the 54th Mass, you've got the 8 USCT, you've got a lot of the famous regiments that from different battles. And it's the only battle really fought in Florida. And it's probably, I've not been there, but they tell me, Mary, it is the best reenactment in any Civil War battle.
Yeah, I've heard that from a few people, because they do the reenactment right there. I think it's not a gigantic battlefield, but it's an interesting one to study. Again, it's not something that gets studied a lot, but it happens in February of 1864. The Meridian Campaign happens, Sherman's Meridian Campaign, which is that's his kind of test drive to see if the March to the Sea is going to work. And then you also have the Battle of Okolona, which is William Soy Smith, who is what a shit show. That guy.
Also, Smith was part of Meridian too. I mean, he's well, so is Smith. He obviously he really had a shitty experience against Nathan Bedford Forrest.
But it's also Soy Smith.
No, it was. I mean, he's one of those guys.
You look at his picture; he looks like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo.
No, he does. But he's one of those guys who could screw up a free lunch. He just was. He had a. He had a game plan to it, but he also, the thing about him too is he was a mean-spirited prick too, because he would, for all the Sherman people ripping up on him, Suey Smith kind of did a lot of the things Sherman was accused of. I mean, he was shooting people in front of their families to get, because there was that one story where he wanted the house for headquarters. The guy would leave, so he shot him right in front of his family. The guy, he tried to prevent his, another person wanted to save his house, saying he was a Freemason, and he didn't care. He burned it anyway.
I remember that, talking about that in the episode we did about Okolona. I think, and we talked about this in Meridian, and Okolona is part of Meridian Campaign. It is, right? It's part of Meridian Campaign, or no? It's separate.
No, it was all part of the whole. It was part of the whole.
Yeah. So I think a lot of what happens on the Meridian Campaign is why Sherman has this reputation when he starts his march to the sea, because rumors just traveled fast. The people got word of how he was, of how Soy Smith was, and what happened, and it just traveled down to Georgia. So by the time March to the Sea. Sherman's already got his public relations that he needs to instill the fear of God in people. And it's thanks to the Meridian campaign.
No, I mean he was a cult of personality. Bring Morano to Southie. You know what, Andrew? I've been trying to get Chris to come up here. We got to get him up here pretty soon. He's a funny dude. Yeah. But no, for the most part, he has that cult of personality. You know, if you read Margaret Mitchell's book, she wrote that book called Gone with the Wind. I don't know if you've heard of that. But she wrote it really shows. It reminds me of what the hell is that movie? Cloverfield, where there's this monster attacking, but they don't really show the monster, but you just see the people's fear. And that's how the first half of Gone with the Wind is. All you see is the fire in the distance. Oh my God, Sherman's coming.
You just hear about Sherman, and anybody too who saw that movie. And I know, like, you know, there was members of my family that saw it, and they were like, well, he was not a good person in Gone with the Wind. And I'm like, okay.
No, I mean,
and like just kind of talk to them about that part of it.
No, I mean he did a lot of the stuff he's accused of, but he also didn't do a lot of the stuff he's accused of. But and you know, I think people will say that, you know, really he did more damage in North Carolina than Georgia.
And nobody really talks about that. And it was on, you know, right now, you know, 1864. This is when he's going through the Carolinas, and this is the one that, you know, he said that in his memoir. Sherman just saw the March to the Sea as he was moving his base of operations. It was not a big deal, but he said, like, you know, I think something that bothered him was nobody remembered the Carolinas, and all anybody ever talked about was, you know, kind of the marching through Georgia, the March to the Sea. And he knew, I think he was more nervous about the Carolinas because that was where it had all began, you know, and he was like, I don't know if I can keep my men under control. You have the burning of Columbia that happens on February 17th, 1860. Is that 1865, right? Yes, 1865.
Well, burning of Columbia is interesting because it's a situation where, like a lot of these battles, you need the people who control the city, in this case the South, are going to burn the cotton.
And they were ordered to. It was Wade Hampton's men.
And it's windy, and it's setting and then like just see like these riots you see where things get out of control, shit starts to happen, stops burning, and then everyone gets involved, and now you got the Union guys looting and burning, and it just turns into a complete dumpster fire. If the Indians ever win a World Series, that may happen in Cleveland. Unfortunately, you don't have to ever worry about that. But that's kind of what happened with that. Was you had, you know, like Billy Joel, we didn't start the fire, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of what that was. That could have been the North song for that, but the Confederates did. Wade Hampton, all of that, they're going to do all that, and then Sherman's going to be accused of it because you know what he does do? He looks the other way.
He does, yeah, and it's left to you know, Howard is the one that is in charge at Columbia, and Sherman does play the blame game. He's like, it was all Wade Hampton's men, and Sherman admitted later on, he was like, yeah, I was just blame game. Our men did just as much damage too. Howard writes a pretty, I don't want to say it's balanced because it's memoirs, so there is bias in it. But Howard, as much as he says, you know, he says the Confederates were ordered, they burnt the cotton because anything that we could take, they burnt. But Howard said, you know, and what happened is there was like hurricane force winds and everything just caught fire. But he said what didn't help was that the Union soldiers were drinking and they were causing just as much damage. But he does say there were Union soldiers that they would protect the citizens. And he said, the other thing he said, anything that was burned by the Union deliberately was because it could have been used for war, and that those were his orders. But he doesn't say we were angels. He's basically like, you know, Howard just says we lost control of our men, and he was like, it was against all orders to do that. But he said like they were releasing prisoners, and I think he felt really bad for the people that they would leave their houses and they would come out and they would sit on all their belongings, and everything they had was with them because they were watching their house go up in flames. So he said it was a very, he said he can't even describe how bad the night of February 17th going into the 18th was. I think it was probably one of his worst nights of the Civil War because, you know, he's watching Union troops, basically they're rioting, they're drunk, they're drinking whiskey out of barrels. And he said some of them had never drank before. But he said there were Union troops that protected the citizens too,
yeah, I mean,
but he doesn't lay blame. He doesn't say it was the Confederates' fault. He said it's equal, but it was all part of. Howard just implies this is all part of war. There's no point. Basically saying there's no point in laying blame. You know, there was a number of different factors at play, kind of thing. So I think that's why his account is probably as close to the truth as we're ever going to get.
No, but right. But a lot of the books written, Margaret Mitchell's book, obviously Mary Chestnut's diary talks a lot about Sherman.
Yeah.
It's that whether it's true. And her book is interesting, because you've said this a million times, is a lot of the stuff she wrote about is not true, but she felt it was at the time. That was the popular thing at the time. Yeah. And she's sitting there in Charleston expecting Sherman to come in and just go Beetlejuice on the entire town. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's
but
what
he ends up bypassing it. And then you got Schimmelfettig is going to come in and take the town, just kind of hold it. The Pigman, right? But that's the mentality of all this was, and that's part of Sherman's total war. It's psychological war too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Caleb mentions Mary Chestnut describes the fear perfectly, just as you said, with the knowledge of Sherman's approach. And he said they thought South Carolina would not exist when they were done with it. So again, that goes back to just like the fear that, and if she's feeling it, then others are feeling it too. And that's just like this whole trickle down effect that Sherman's having on
people. I'm glad Carolina exists, because Holy City Brewery wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for Sherman bypass. Who knows?
Andrea Quinn also mentions The War Outside My Window, the diary of Leroy Gresham by Janet Croon, has accounts of Sherman's march too. Interesting perspective from a disabled young teen. So there's another book as well. And yeah, Charleston, you mentioned, it surrenders the same day that Columbia burns, February 17th.
Charleston must have been like whistling by the graveyard when the Union. I mean, they must have been thinking the hammer was going to fall. And they got off. Obviously, by all accounts, they got off pretty easy, because that would have been a revenge thing. And for the people who rip on Sherman, they tend to forget that. They think he's this monster and all this stuff. But by all accounts, if he was the monster that people thought he was, and it was true, he would have absolutely razed that entire city. He would have salted the earth. But it didn't make a military sense, because, like you said a while ago, it was war. The goal was to get the war done. He had to get up to Virginia and per his plan to meet up with Grant, and he didn't make it because the war ended before that. But he does a lot of bad things.
Yeah.
But he does so. But in his mind, the things he did were to save lives by expediting the end of the war, right?
Yeah.
But again, anybody who's been to Atlanta, been to Georgia, the stories you hear that aren't true, but it's folklore. It's whatever.
It honestly is a very interesting part to see how that does still trickle down, and to see how that history, how it's talked about there. And there was that one guy that did the did Sherman's march. He drove it, and he would stop, and he said the further he got away from Atlanta, the more, the worse people felt about Sherman. Kind of these people, the stories have been passed down. But the Carolinas does not get talked about a lot. I find it way more fascinating than March to the Sea. And especially about Columbia, how that turns into who burned what. And it really was nothing more than the Confederates lighting fire to the cotton. Wind played a factor.
No,
and then you have drunken Union soldiers. So I mean,
and I know a lot of books have been written about it. Trudeau's Southern Storm comes to mind, but I think the March of the Sea is overrated. It is
compared to the Columbia campaign is way more fascinating, because I think it was the one that Sherman was most nervous about. Am I going to be able to control my men, kind of thing? And I mean, like we said when we talked about the March to the Sea, when we did our episodes on it, we, again, Howard reference, everyone drink. I think he's put in charge at Columbia because Sherman knows he's like the adult in the room.
The campaign
in charge at Columbia would have been a disaster.
I mean, the two campaigns that were going on at the same time, Overland campaign and the Nashville campaign, were way more significant than the March of the Sea campaign. I mean, it just was. I mean,
the march was like kind of this like, it was more like this psychological thing that's going on. But the reason too that it's in history the way it is because of Sherman. His memoirs were very popular. You have songs written about it, which Sherman hated marching through Georgia. But it became this kind of it was like an adventure for these guys.
Oh, they're living off the land. So they're going into houses and farms, and they're taking food, and they're burning plantations, and they're doing a different type of war. And a lot of the soldiers were off in Virginia or off in Tennessee fighting in different places. And you have basically women, children, and older men to defend. Yeah. And I think Gone with the Wind has a huge part of this. I
Oh,
think that's a huge,
it does.
know,
I've talked about it with my relatives that enjoy the movie. And, I said, I'm like, this is not, like I said, this is written from a certain perspective. It's still a very good book. I enjoy the first part of the movie with the Civil War. Like I can forget about the last half of it.
no,
I found it boring. I'm not a huge fan of Scarlet. I'm not a huge like I'm like, bleh. I like the Civil War aspect of it because I think it shows how scared they were. But like the March to the Sea, it was also like you read some of the accounts of the soldier diaries, or you read the best account I've ever read. It's not a firsthand account, but it's the way Robert L. O'Connell writes about it in his biography about Sherman, Fierce Patriot. He talks that he said it was like a circus at times. And he also compared the march to like this gigantic land shark moving through Georgia. But he said, the bummers, the guys that were charged with going out and doing the raiding, they would come back at the end of the day, and it was entertainment. Men would come back wearing, like they were taking dresses and stuff they didn't need to take, but they'd come back wearing women's hats. They had dresses on, and it was just like, it was like a circus almost. It was entertainment.
But it's funny, speaking of that movie and the book, Boston University, their colors are scarlet and white. And so what their mascot's name is Rhett.
Wow.
So another reason I hate BU. Just saying, right? But it's kind of funny. And people don't realize, and it's so funny was, people that obviously friends of mine who went to school at BU, they have no idea the history of it. It's just one of those things, which is kind of funny. But there's definitely a lot of truth to that, as far as the mentality, and that's what's it's that psychological war that he intended to do. And what's great about it is when you mentioned Meridian a little while ago, Meridian was the test. That was the, let's see if we can do this.
Let's see if this can work, and let's see if we can live off the land.
But I'll tell you, this is a huge mistake. We said this a million times when we talk about Hood, was why Davis had him go to Nashville and not chase Sherman. Me personally, that was a huge mistake. And I know, guys like Joe Ricci will disagree with us, and that's all well and good. But I just seem to think that instead of going to get Nashville, he had no idea that Sherman was going to live off the land. He didn't. He figured, go to Nashville, stop the supplies. That's going to take care of Sherman. But I would have liked to have seen how that history might have been different if Hood's Army of Tennessee chased Sherman and just nipped at his heels and slowed him down.
He would have had to pick one. But the thing is like, how would he do that? Miranda mentions perspectives on the March to the Sea also depend what your lives were afterwards. Atlanta's more cosmopolitan now. And then she said very rural areas may have generational poverty. So
I told that story, 4 years ago, I was down in Atlanta right around this time of year. And I was amazed at how new the city looked for an old city. We were sitting at a bar called Montana's, me and our friend Bill, after a couple of adult beverages here. And I said, Atlanta, I told the bartender, Atlanta's an old city. It looks so new. And the guy goes, yeah, because you assholes burned it. That's what he told us.
So did
of course, I got my Sherman T-shirt on at the time. Yeah. But I'm like, that's not really true. I had to tell the whole story with that. Yeah. He's like, whatever, you guys burned that. But that's truthful,
But I think it's in the March to the Sea stretched. I think it was 60 miles wide when you factor in the two wings and all that. And Sherman, I think for the most part, rode with Slocum on the left wing. Slocum's left wing, Howard's right wing. Yep. Which is he going to go after? Hood would have had to pick a wing, right? He's not going to be like divide the army and go
no. See, I don't know though, because I think if he was just his presence, I'm not sure the wings would. I don't think Sherman's splitting his army up like that. I think if Hood's followed that 60,000 man, whatever the hell he had, Army of Tennessee, I think that's going to force him to keep that army together. I don't think he's separating his army in the face of a gigantic army of Tennessee.
But he'd already planned that. But he'd already planned.
I mean, it's the reason why Gettysburg happened is because Lee realized they were spread. He had to put the army back together. And I don't mean, does Sherman? That's a good what if is. Does Sherman keep the wings? I don't see how possibly he does.
He planned it that way, so he would have had to change his plan. And then Hood said, "Oh, hey, Jim's on here." Caleb said Hood destroyed his ability to give any resistance to Sherman's march.
No, he did. Yeah, he went that away, and he went that away.
Yeah, but if he had, and who knows what you have the battle of, was it Griswoldville, which is that's a tragic thing. That's just older men and boys.
Well, Griswoldville was really the one real battle. There was a couple different things here and there, little skirmishes here and there, but Griswoldville was right at the beginning of the March to the Sea, and he rolled right over them the way Cincinnati rolled over Buffalo. By the way, just saying.
Yep.
But
there is a book written about Griswoldville. I've never, it's a historical fiction. I've never read it before. But I think the author is Jordan Poss, and he's written a book, and it's like I've been meaning to read it for quite a few years, but there is a book about it. I think that would be interesting to read.
But that just goes to show the misguidedness of that Nashville campaign, and it puts a spotlight even more about the unnecessary deaths at Spring Hill, Franklin, and Nashville. Does that bang, 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 chasing Schofield back to Nashville to meet up with George Thomas.
Yeah.
And Franklin, we said this a million times, is a stupid battle. Again, hindsight being our benefactor, because you don't know at the time what the hell.
Anything after Atlanta is a tragic loss of
it is. But I mean, if you're going to take that Army of Tennessee, and you're going to get Claiborne, and you're going to get Forrest, and you're going to get all those guys, Granberry and John Adams, and not that John Adams, the other John Adams, all fighting against Sherman. We'll see how that goes. Does that force Grant to dispatch a corps to help Sherman?
Yeah.
Right. And let's pretend for a second it's the 6th Corps. He's not going to have the 6th Corps to chase Jubal Early.
No.
In Maryland. Right. Who knows if that's but the 6th Corps was always his go-to corps.
Yeah.
How does that change everything?
Well,
right. Who knows? But that's how you can think about this stuff. If you can see the whole war, this period, if you can take a step back and big picture, and you see where all these parts are moving, it's easy to play that what if game.
Yeah, well, I know some people don't like the what if game. I've read that recently on Facebook. Well, we don't like to play the what if game. It's like, I think it really is a great way to understand more of what actually happened. But it's also fun too, because you it's like, wait, so if A happens, then B, C, D are completely different, like what we did.
Well, the thing about it is Hood was doing what he was told to do.
Yeah.
This is gonna fall back to Jefferson Davis, because we were talking before how when Lincoln gave Rosecrans the gig of the Army of Cumberland and said, you can have the army, but I need you to do this. Hood had that backdoor deal with Jeff Davis. I think he was told, I'm going to give you this Army of Tennessee, but you're going to be aggressive, and here's what you're going to Nashville. I think he was a rock'em sock'em robot.
Yeah, he was like, we need to somehow get this done. Maybe it was to keep morale up.
I mean, he's not a thinking man's general like a Grant is, or even a Sherman. He's not. That's not who he is. I mean, he's Mongo from Blazing Saddles is who he is. Yeah, he's just going to go kill everybody.
Hood needs to be supervised. He does not need to be a supervisor, and Jeff Davis is not a good supervisor for Hood. Jason mentions, and maybe I think you were talking a bit about this. If Hood chases Sherman, what would Schofield and Thomas have done?
They would have gone to Nashville. That was their plan.
Yeah, but would Schofield's, they? But if Sherman, you guys need to come down and help me.
No, I don't think so. See, they went after Schofield, because remember there was that big race to beat Schofield to Nashville, or beat him along the way. I think he's going to sit there, and he's going to he's just going to sit there and afford. I mean, maybe, who knows? Maybe if the war in the East starts to go bad, they're going to send Schofield east again. But I don't know. It just seems like a real. And again, none of this is right. None of this is wrong. It's just opinion. No. But it just seems it was such a miscalculation of your best resource at the time was Army of Tennessee. It was the best. It was the best you had. I mean, with all apologies to Lee and Longstreet and all those guys.
It's so mismanaged from the beginning that they just can't get their shit together. But they have like what are probably the stars of the kind of the Confederacy there. They got Claiborne. They got, Cheatham's not too bad, but you got Hardee. Hardee's not in it at that point, but. David asked regarding Hood and Jeff Davis, was it a Savannah deal?
Well,
that joke really took off when you said that. You're like, and he's going to go in the back door of Savannah. And as I say that, it sounds really bad.
That's probably a breech loader joke there somewhere. But I mean, but I don't know. It's just one of those things where it just seems like, again, and you got to remember too, is when you sit down, you go on social media and you hear these people talking about this and that. It's easy to talk about it when you have history as your benefactor. You can look back, but in real time, this stuff was going on. They had no idea what Sherman was doing. They had no idea.
They don't. They're blind. They're blind to it, right? And it's just.
You're just go back to these for a second. You've got Petersburg basically surrounded, and somehow Jubal Early sneaks around and threatens Washington right under their noses. And the entire war for Lincoln was no matter what the hell you friggin' do, you better defend Washington. And at the peak moment, right before the election of 64, here comes Jubal Early rolling into town.
Yeah.
And so that's one of those pucker moment things that happen.
Thank you, Lew Wallace.
Right. But I'm just saying that. So it probably would have been the last thing they ever expected. But I give credit to Lee there. Lee was still rolling the dice because he knew he had to. He could have turtled and just waited, but he still had the opportunity. If you read a lot of Lew Wallace's stuff, or if you read a lot about Monocacy stuff, or go see our friend Matt Borders over there at the battlefield. He'll tell you all about it, of how important. There's a reason why they'd say it's the battle, let's say, of Washington. And,
it's a very important battle.
And it's true. Look, make no mistake about it here. It's not like they were going to hold Washington. It was never going to happen. But what they could have done was they could have gone in there. They could have freaked the people out. They could have just ridden around the town, burned the White House, just like stupid Canadians did. And they could have done a lot of stuff with that. But what that could have done is that could have sent the message to the North that Lincoln can't protect his own backyard. Yeah. We have to end this war. And the only way the Confederacy was going to win that war was by the election. And the timing could not have been worse. It was that October moment that you hear about modern day elections. So they weren't going to take the city and set up barbecues and do all the stuff.
No, they were just going to go in there enough to spook them and freak out morale and all that. Caleb was wondering if you are a fan of Ord, because nobody ever talks about him, and he was in both theaters.
Well, this kind of goes back to my attitude towards Ohio, Caleb, when you're talking about Edward Ord. No, I mean, Ord is a guy who,
he's with Rosecrans.
Not really, because, this is the guy who really, when you go back to Rosecrans and you talk about some of the stuff he did, the mistakes he made, Ord was there, but I mean, he had his moments, certainly arriving at Shiloh just in time. Yeah. But I don't think, is there an Ord fan? I mean, I don't think his family are Ord fans.
He's in both theaters of the war, and actually, his poor wife gets basically. She's the reason that Lincoln gets a strip torn off him by Mary Lincoln when he's visiting.
Yeah,
because he's up. Ord and his wife are there, and he's up riding with Ord and his wife. And apparently, Lincoln struck up a conversation with Ord's wife. Well, Mary Lincoln is back in the carriage with Julia Grant, which. Julia Grant was probably like that fucking Garfield cling at that point. Anyway, Mary Lincoln gets out of the carriage and sees Ord's wife and Lincoln talking, and she just goes over and completely lays into him about it.
No, Mary Lincoln would have been one of those Jersey Shore girls. I think that's how she would have been if she was
Snooki.
One of those who was always like, you get away from my man. One of those people.
Snooki?
I never had stupid shit, but I like Rosecrans better than Ord, and I think Ord really let him down hard at the Battle of Iuka. But I think that was probably more on Grant than Ord. But no, Ord is just one of those guys. I don't get it. I don't quite. That's what that is.
We talked about him, but he's in both theaters in the war. MJ mentioned she got destroyed in a post last night when someone asked, "What if Stonewall were in charge of the Army of Northern Virginia at Gettysburg?" And I said, in my view, he is overrated.
Well, I mean, here's the thing about Jackson, right? Was if you say he's overrated, that doesn't mean you think he sucks. It just means that for me anyway, overrated. And I think Stonewall's overrated. I do. But what I mean by that is I don't think he is this end all be all transcendent guy who walked on water. He had a lot of mistakes. We said this a million times. You talk about Stonewall Jackson, you hear about Chancellorsville, you hear a lot about the Valley, right? You hear about but you don't hear about the 7 days. You don't hear about Kernstown. You don't hear. So I think he's one of the best ones, but he's not this. He's one of that. He has that Kurt Cobain syndrome where he died and made him great because he died. Whereas if it went on, he might have got exposed a little bit. We said this a million times. The best they had, in my opinion, was Claiborne. It was not even close. Not even close.
Claiborne, and I think Claiborne and John Brown Gordon.
But that's right. Gordon II. But that doesn't mean that I think Stonewall Jackson's terrible and he's awful. It just means that I don't think he's this. So if you're saying he's overrated, you're going to get them all ruffled up down there in Virginia, especially with some of the Confederates on Twitter. But the thing is that you can sit there and say, I think Abraham Lincoln's overrated. Just going to say it. That doesn't mean I think he sucks. I just mean that I think people tend to ignore a lot of the stuff that he did, you don't want to be there when they make the sausage, right? That's kind of how Lincoln is. Greatest president this country's probably ever had, along with Lincoln and FDR. But you can't look past the foibles and you can't look past the mistakes. And he's another guy who was killed, shot on Good Friday, the whole deal. But that doesn't mean you think they suck. It just means they're not beyond criticism. And I think that's the problem.
They're human. And the thing is like, Lynn said exactly, overrated does not mean he sucks. Jackson is not, my opinion, Jackson's not as good as what Claiborne is. He's not as good as what John Brown Gordon is. He's just, and yet Jackson had some amazing moments. Chancellorsville specifically, when he routs the 11th Corps, that is probably one of his greatest moments in the Civil War. And unfortunately, he don't go riding at dusk. That's the moral of the story. Do not ride at dusk.
No, when you sit down and you're sitting down in Spotsylvania, or you're sitting in any of these places and you talk about Stonewall Jackson, we'll go to the bar and we tend to talk to locals about Civil War stuff because that's how cool we are, right? And people talk about it, but if you say anything against Jackson, it's just not true. And if he survived the 8th North Carolina at Chancellorsville, the war would have won. Everybody would have free cable today. You name it. It would have been the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
But the reality is none of these guys are perfect, but you should be able to point out, even if you're a Northerner or you're a Southerner, like I said, you can look at people you like, and if you're studying at a higher level, you can point out, you should be comfortable pointing out their mistakes and their failings, because it's a learning experience.
Well, they're not, none of them are perfect. None of them, Jackson there's only one person who's perfect in the world, and that's Tom Brady. He's the only one. But beyond that, everybody has their mistakes. That's it. Well, MJ said that. She said, how would that have went when Jackson was known for not sharing things with his subordinates?
Well, he's very much like Joe Hooker in that regard, right?
Look where that got Joe Hooker at Chancellorsville.
But here's the thing about Stonewall. He was smart about that, because you know what knowledge is? Knowledge is power.
Yep.
And if you have that, one of the first things Meade did when he took over at the end of June in 1963 was he had to find out where the corps were, because Hooker wouldn't tell him. He just, that's kind of how it was. And Jackson had that same thing. I'm not sure how much he trusted the other generals. Look how much, guys like Garnett, he certainly didn't trust him. He didn't trust AP Hill. Because what he would do is he threw court marshals around like people throwing candy on Halloween.
Oh, I know. And
with these guys,
like Garnett carried that with him for the rest of his life, which was not to be long, unfortunately. And he said, he wrote lies all over it, because, Garnett becomes this scapegoat that he does what a lot of the guys have to do at Franklin. He has to I have to now prove myself, and I'm going to put myself in harm's way. And they found Garnett's body,
right? But he had that cult of personality too, Jackson. Yeah. There's a reason why these guys burned VMI. When during the battle, and he was a great general. There's no question he was.
He was, yeah.
But the overrated thing is, and that's eye of the beholder. Look, if somebody you love yourself some Stonewall, knock yourself out. No one's going to tell you otherwise.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
I think when you look at the big picture, just as long as you can study the things about him that aren't really good that he did, then I think you'll get a better appreciation at the end of the day. If you
study the things that aren't good about them, about the mistakes that they made, I think it makes you appreciate them more, because first of all, they're human, but secondly, you can see if they learned from their mistakes. You look at somebody like Pat Claiborne at Shiloh, and he goes ahead, he nearly gives away their position. He pretty much does, because Appler hears them. But he recognized the mistake that happened at Shiloh was that he realized, had he been able to take out the Union artillery, they might have gained a little bit more ground. So what does he do after Shiloh? In the downtime, he takes his men and he trains them as sharpshooters, because he realized if you can take out the horses and the men around the artillery, you might be able to gain that ground, because they're not going to be able to fire those shells at you. And it's about learning from your mistakes. And Gordon does similar things as well. But you know, you have to look at their mistakes to understand who they were as people. You can't just see them as like, you can't put them on a pedestal. Like, you know, it's happened to Grant, it's happened to Jackson, it's happened to Lincoln. You have to look at the stuff that they did wrong too and how they handled it.
Of course. And, we look at the fact that both Longstreet and Jackson, were both, they both wanted to be the apple of Robert E. Lee's eye. And
Yep.
I get that. And Lee, I mean, there's that story at the end of right before the Battle of Fredericksburg where Lee had to go back to Richmond and he had to pick someone to be in charge while he was gone. And you know who he picks? He picks Longstreet over Jackson. And Jackson got completely pissed off about that.
Yep.
And then you have Gettysburg, where Longstreet felt that with Jackson gone, he was the eyes and ears now. He was the right-hand man. And what Longstreet never really understood was that no matter how he saw it, he was still Lee's subordinate. And Lee reminded him of that. And I think that was a big part of a lot of the stuff that went on at Gettysburg with Longstreet. And because you can't deny the fact, I know Corey Farr is a friend of ours. He'll disagree with this, but he was so pissed off when Longstreet went to give those orders to McLaws for that second day, and Lee overrode him. And it was just about where the troops were supposed to line up, right, heading into that battle. And from that point on, for whatever reason, Longstreet felt that Lee was in charge of McLaws. I think he was just, you know what, fine, you're in charge, fine. I don't want to do it anymore.
He got very bent out of shape over that. Caleb mentions that, Jackson had issues with Longstreet as well.
And so you can see the rivalry with that. But all these guys wanted to be Daddy's favorites, right?
Oh, big time. And who turns out to be Daddy's favorite at the end? John Brown Gordon.
Yeah. To a point.
Yeah, he was a lot closer to Lee than I think what, a lot of people realize. You're reading that bio about Gordon right now.
No, the thing about Gordon is, he's somebody who, again, if you study this, you know who he is and you appreciate who John Brown Gordon was. But if you don't, for the most part, he's not an A-level guy. He's not Stonewall Jackson. He's not Robert E. Lee. He's not, Jeb Stuart or any of that. But he was just about undefeated for the most part. I mean, Fort Stedman was his own real loss, but that really wasn't his fault. I mean, you think about it. He beat Hancock at Spotsylvania.
Yeah.
Right. He fought he crushed, the 11th Corps at Gettysburg. Sorry if this brings up bad memories for you, Mary. But he was the guy who kind of did almost everything right. He fought hard at the Sunken Road in Antietam. Yeah. And got shot up like a pinata that
Cashed
day.
In his karma.
Right. And he came back and fought. We talk a lot about the battles that he did. But the thing about Gordon was all the post-war stuff he did. I don't mean the Klan shit. I mean that. I'm talking about the politics he did, where he had to ride that fence where he needed very much to get these states, the Union Army, out of these states, these 5 military districts, to get away, to free them. But he also had to kowtow to the South too. He had to play it both ways. And he did it pretty well. He was pretty much single-handedly the guy responsible for getting the Union out of South Carolina.
Yeah.
And out of the military district and allow them that home rule again. And so if you really study John Brown Gordon well, you can appreciate, especially if you're a Southerner, what he did to help the post-Reconstruction, which was to help them become their own states again and get these Union troops who were manipulating their elections. Yeah. And what's so funny was all the stuff that they tried very much to get Rutherford B. Hayes not elected. They thought they had him beat, and it didn't happen. So he was somebody who was an interesting study. He's one of those guys who lived a long time after the war.
Yeah,
and his post-war politics is almost as interesting as his war battles. But he's not really studied for whatever reason. And he has a lot of bad shit in his closet too. I mean, he does.
Yeah.
But he's somebody who...
reason not to study or to make somebody feel bad if they do study John Brown Gordon, as long as you're recognizing that side of it. Because when you study these people, they're going to have bad shit. And they're Gordon does. They all do. I don't care what side you're on. There's bad stuff all around. But the thing is, you have to study it to understand who they were. And his... like Caleb says, his memoirs will nearly kill you. The man could write, but holy shit, he could also spin a tale. Like,
Yep, I got him right here.
Yep.
Reminiscences of which is quite a thing. But
it was funny. My mom, she gave me it was not this past Christmas, obviously, but a couple Christmases ago, she gave me a whole bunch of Amazon certificates. She's like, go buy yourself some Civil War books. So I took that over to her after I bought it, and she was like, who's that guy? And I started telling her about Gordon.
You talk about Claiborne. This is a guy who happened to be born in the North. I mean, this is a guy who was not a West Point guy. He was a lawyer. No. He tried to, after the war. The thing about him is, after the war, he really was kind of broke. Didn't really have much of a pot to piss in. So he got into that insurance like they all did. And then I forget.
Davis getting into that is hilarious.
But I mean, it was like Southern Heritage Insurance Company, or it was something like that. And he ended up employing a lot of generals, in this, like Wade Hampton worked for him. He had a lot of guys who worked for him, and then you get into the politics. But if you can don't, his memoirs are fine. But if you read some of the bios about him, he's interesting, because a lot of them, the good ones, the war stuff ends like 100 pages in. The last 200 pages are his politics. Yeah. And he was so instrumental in a lot of different ways. And he's somebody, and like we said before, like who you like, but if you're a Southerner, if you're a Confederate, you like Gordon way more than you like Stonewall, because he did more as post-war than pretty much any of them did. He really did.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah. Caleb said he likes Gordon. And I mean, I like to study Gordon. He's a very interesting figure, but yes, his memoirs it's like, okay, what is true and what is not here? But also because he does like to obviously embellish. I think some of it's not true, but that's like anybody's memoirs, right? Like, he's doing what any of them are doing, but I think he does it on a little bit more than the others maybe. But his account of Appomattox is considered one of the more accurate ones that we might have, because, he was there. He talks about it, he's talking about it obviously from the Confederate perspective. The one thing that really struck me with his account, from leaving Richmond and all that, was how devastated he was. He had to leave his wife behind because she was sick, and how worried he was. And that was really, I think that was on his mind more than, I think, surrendering at Appomattox, because how much he talks about it. And he just said, he's like, I hope someone would protect her. Because she'd been with him. She left the kids with, I think, her mother, and said, I'm coming on the war with you. And she was with him the entire time.
Well, what was funny was he had a daughter named Caroline, right? Yeah. And right after he helped elect Democrats in South Carolina to get that military away from South Carolina, his wife got knocked up again. Yeah. And he had another daughter. And he had so much public pressure, he had to name her Carolina. So he had Caroline and Carolina daughters, and one of them died young, which really affected him. But that just kind of shows how popular he was, being that voice, to help offset the Northern Republicans, because a lot of them wanted to put the Rebs' dick in the dirt just forever, right? Yeah. And he had to keep that flame going. I'm not sure how some of these states would have played out down the road if he wasn't around. If he died, because he was somebody who was so instrumental with post-war politics, about helping to get states in the South to be able to elect the people they wanted again, to get that home rule thing back. And he was like the torchbearer with that. Yeah. And so he and the Republicans went at him so hard, trying to get him out of office, and they couldn't do it. Yeah. But he's, like I said before, if you're a Confederate, if you're a Southerner, he's somebody you should really embrace, because he's somebody who did just as much post-war as he did during the war. And he did a lot during the war. He really did. Oh yeah, I mean, he's all Eastern theater, but still, it's fascinating to study his career. Just quick mention here, Jim Miller has started posting Rutherford B. Hayes's post-war writings on Civil War Notebook, which is, if you just search for Civil War Notebook I think he's on Twitter, and he's also on Facebook. Jim does a lot of awesome stuff with that. Yeah, he's our friend. He does a lot of good stuff, and he does a lot of good and he has that amazing sign he brings to our roundtables. That's great. Jim, he's an awesome dude.
But yeah, I think, Gordon is definitely a very fascinating study. I like looking at their post-war careers too. Obviously, like somebody like Gordon, somebody like Lee is fascinating. It makes you
And if
wonder
you go
what
to
some.
if you go to Oakland Cemetery, which we're going to go in a few months, Mary, you can go visit his grave. He's buried right next to Iverson, and he's buried not far from Margaret Mitchell. Speaking of her from earlier,
Wow.
And then Ambrose Wright's father is buried right there.
Mhm.
Ambrose Wright from Georgia, who fought
Yep.
at Gettysburg, who is still pissed at David Lang. By the way, I don't think he's got over him. That whole thing, which I think is unfair on David Lang's part, but he should be blaming Muhammad Posey if he wants to be pissed. If the ghost of Ambrose Wright is still mad, he had that great hair, by the way.
Yeah.
He had that Fabio type hair, like the one I had when I had the wig when I was pretending to be you. That's he might have had the best mullet of the Civil War, by the way. That's right. He used to wear it in a ponytail. He used to. If you look at the pictures, if you look at his picture, there's a popular picture of him, probably one of the only ones. You can sort of see it in the back. But he had that. He was like Barksdale, but that was more of a comb overy thing. He has that big, huge hair, which I can always appreciate. Guy with doing good hair.
Jim said that sign's ours whenever we meet in person.
It's so funny. You can see him going for it. Like, well,
he'll be like,
he'll just reach down, like, yep, here it
comes,
and
slowly.
That is pretty funny though. That's pretty funny.
Andrew Quinn mentions, we talked about this before, Gordon saved my poor Barlow, and that Barlow also had a really interesting post-Civil War career too. I mean, he's one of the younger guys fighting at the war, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, the Gordon Barlow story is a good one. I mean, I don't want to say it's embellished a little bit, but I think it's the story on the 1st of July helps create that story later when they met.
Yeah.
But he certainly did. There was definitely a Masonic connection with that, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot of good stories with that. But I think Gordon did appreciate a fighter. He certainly did. Barlow gets a lot of shit for pulling his troops on, creating that salient over there in blockers. No, but people say that now because they knew that early was that Gordon was coming.
Yeah,
that's a good position if you don't think he's coming. You're just fighting George Dole's Georgians, and you're fighting O'Neill. But when you've got Gordon and you've got Early coming through the savannah on you, then you're screwed.
That is an amazing painting too. There's a painting of Gordon coming through the woods towards.
This hat out, like, here I am.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Beyonce taking the stage. But that's kind of
a reference I didn't expect.
It is what it is. Yeah. She's torn again, so go see Beyonce. But that's the whole thing too. And despite what you hear on the battlefield, the Barlow's men and the 11th Corps guys not turn and run and hightail. They fought their asses off. And if you read Gordon's memoirs, he talks about how hard the 11th Corps fought. As a matter of fact, he said it was the hardest fight in the entire war was fighting the 11th Corps at Gettysburg. That's how hard they fought.
Yeah, they were, the 11th Corps, despite their reputation, are actually very hard fighting men. And I mean, I don't care who you are, you're getting routed by Jackson at that position at Chancellorsville. And that's when, that was my opinion before I even saw the ground at Chancellorsville. But then when I saw the ground and I saw where von Gilsa's guys were, first of all, von Gilsa definitely heard those guys. But Howard, for whatever reason, and this is Howard's mistake in the Civil War, he should have taken more heed to what von Gilsa was telling him. Like, yeah, I know Sickles is telling you they're retreating, but maybe if you're one guy that is right there, keeps saying, they're here, dude. Like, I think they're going to attack. You might want to take his word over the guy that is a few miles away from you.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody is getting routed at that position. But then at Gettysburg, Howard does mention, and I know there's people that have said that Howard didn't fight for his men after Chancellorsville. He never stood up for them. He did, because he got a letter from who was probably Meade. We're not sure, but we suspect it was Meade, told him, you need to seek another command because those guys will never fight. And Howard said, my men deserved another chance. And they fight hard at Gettysburg. And you have to remember too, Howard is only in charge of the 11th Corps on the first day for a short period of time before he has to take over. It's Carl Schurz that is thrown into being commander of the 11th Corps. And he gets criticized for what he did. But again, we have to go back to like the heat of battle. Like,
it goes back to reputation.
And all that, and reputation.
It goes to reputation
because they're German.
I mean, I think that a lot of Von Gilsa, Adelbart Ames, Barlow. I think they fought so hard on that first day at Gettysburg. Yeah, we're talking Gettysburg again, so sorry. But I think it's because I don't want to. We talk a lot about redemption, right? Were they sort of fighting because of what did happen at Chancellorsville? But the problem is the reputation. So if you read Charles Wainwright's diary, the artillerist, right, when they're setting up those guns, Ricketts batteries, and those guys on East Cemetery Hill, he's going to tell these artillery guys, you need to stay and fight to the death here. You cannot run, because as soon as it gets ugly, these 11th Corps guys are probably going to take off on you. And they sort of did, because Von Gilsa GTFO'd as soon as
Von
Hayes
Gilsa is
Avery's,
not the face of the 11th Corps.
But as soon as Hayes and Avery's guys are going to come, Von Gilsa is going to go, and they are going to fight, and they're going to fight right amongst the guns until Shizanovsky and Sam Carroll from the 2nd come.
Yeah.
But that was the reputation they had, was as soon as it gets ugly, they are going to run. And that goes back not because of Gettysburg the day before, it goes back to Chancellorsville. And people hear that story, that when they read the Wainwright diary, they think they're talking about the previous day. They're talking about Chancellorsville. And that's where the reputation begins. And they never get over it.
They never do. They never get a chance to like kind of redeem themselves. Unfortunately, it sticks with them, but it sticks to because they are primarily German, and Germans don't have a great reputation. Andrea Quinn mentions that several Confederate soldiers in their letters home wrote how the 11th Corps at Gettysburg was not the same 11th Corps at Chancellorsville. And that's the impression I get. And again, this goes back to, you have something like the Wainwright diary. This goes back to, how do we have this perception of, certain things in the Civil War, for instance, the 11th Corps? Is it some of the people that have written about it in the modern day that their sources they use are molding it to the opinion they have going into it? And we've talked we've talked a little bit about that too. We talked about Sears with Order 191, as well as how he treats Howard in his Gettysburg book, as well as Chancellorsville. And that's why I think we have some of the kind of the opinions that we do. MJ said,
think about it. I remember back, when I was in college, reading different, classes I was taking, I'd sit there and go, wait a sec. I remember the professor I had last semester on a similar class had something totally different. Yeah. It all goes by, it's all agenda. And there's no question. We've talked before about some of the writers we've talked about before. And even some of the ones we know have agendas. Our friend Kent Masterson Brown, he was a huge Meade guy, right?
Exactly.
Not a big Sickles guy.
No.
Versus, guys like Jim Hessler is a big Sickles guy. And so it's who you like, but you can back it up. And I think a lot of cases is the more you study, the more you're going to see these guys. And I'm someone who likes Sickles and Meade. How about that?
I do too. I love them both. But when it comes down to that one moment at Gettysburg with the Peach Orchard, I'm gonna side with Sickles on that. I understand why he did it. It was because of what happened to the 11th Corps, because that is haunting all the Corps commanders, because I think they recognized that it's not just because it was Howard in the 11th Corps. It was because it was their placement where they're left hanging in the air, that it happened. And they knew. Reynolds knew it. Sickles knew it. They all knew it.
There is no corps on either side that had any direct impact in winning the war overall or losing the war. It's a total team effort one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And it's just, but you can like everybody. You can like them all. And if you like Ireland, does not mean you got to hate Chamberlain or vice versa. But that's
if you like Claiborne, it doesn't mean that.
But we've used that example a lot, though, those two. But that's all of it, though, is, you can, and we saw, I actually thought we were going to catch more shit on the Rosecrans episode for the Grant thing, because you stepped in it many, many times with the, poor old Funko Mary. She gets herself in trouble with this on her social media, where you'll say something positive about Rosecrans, and there's that Pavlovian response. Did the Grant people get all,
even if I haven't mentioned Grant,
even if you haven't mentioned Grant,
I'm not mentioning Grant.
And you can tell, I've said this before, you can tell who reads what by what they write on social media, right? Where, where I think, Grant is probably the best U.S. general outside of George Washington, probably. as far as strategy, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the dude's not without his problems either.
He had a few issues, and he's like a teenage girl sometimes. A lot of them are like teenage girls. You see it with Warren and Sheridan and the whole thing at Five Forks, which I will always be team Warren for that. Like, and I mean that, and I hate Sheridan.
No, well, Sheridan. You know what though? They all have their moments, plus and minus. But it's funny though, because you definitely, for social media anyway, and I guess actually for writers too, is people look at some of these people as if they're sports teams and they're rivals. You know, and I hate to say it, Steve Sears is the worst at that.
Yep,
I mean the worst at that.
I see that more because why do we have the reputation of Border 191 and McClellan is because of what he wrote. But now there thankfully is a new book about McClellan. Of course, the title's escaping me right now.
That's going to be interesting. That
is going to be really interesting because I think it's going to shatter a lot of how Sears has portrayed 191, which is how a lot of people think of 191.
Well, I remember we haven't read. I don't think the book's even come out yet, but we were in a synopsis of it, and it was a lot of the stuff that you and I had talked about when we talked about the episode at Antietam, which is great because it just means we're not crazy for one.
Yeah.
But that'll be interesting to see how it comes out. And look, everyone has their agendas, of course, in every aspect of life they always
and
do.
Nobody's right or wrong. It's how you're interpreting this historical record. But you also have to go to, when you're reading somebody, you have to okay, where are they getting this opinion from? Oh, it's Andrew Cohn mentioned, it's called Twisted Tale.
We'll have to get that one.
Yeah, I definitely want to read that one. But it's all about where you're getting your stuff from. And if you read Sears's book on Chancellorsville, Landscape Turned Red is amazing. I really like his book on Gettysburg. But more and more when I read the stuff about Howard, because sometimes I do go and I'll look at it for research we're doing. I'm like, okay, you can have your opinion, but this is full out, it's terrible how he writes about Howard. It's honest to God not fair at times.
No, but his nemesis in life, without a doubt, to me anyway, for Sears is McClellan. He is
big time.
Because a lot of the Lost Order 191, a lot of that popular myth comes from Sears, and a lot of it is, and I think as you study that, you're speaking of Monocacy Bear 191, right? As you study that, you realize pretty quickly that he used one source, which is Nathan Kimball, which was debunked almost immediately at the time. So it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough to play that out, but that's how it is, though. And you can like who you like and hate who you like, but always stay open-minded.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to, because I can tell you, back when I started studying this, when I went to Gettysburg for the first time when I was 10 years old, I totally was did not like Sickles, was not on board with what he did. I still felt that way when I went there again in high school and when I went there again when I was in my early 20s. But when I started reading about it more and looking at different sources, that's when I started to think, okay, did he have Chancellorsville in his head? And I mean, let's look at what he's trying to get messages back. And he was told he could adjust his line if necessary. Now he adjusts it really far. Meade was not all the way to fucking Richmond, dude. But, I am now Team Sickles on that. I can change my opinion. I used to have I used to like Sherman. I used to think, oh, he's one of the greatest. The more I studied him, the more I started studying other generals. I'm like, Sherman's a little overrated. That doesn't mean he sucks. But there's other generals out there worth studying. Someone and I stumbled into Howard, and Howard is not the greatest the Union Army had. He's also not the worst. His career in the Western theater is where he and a lot of the 11th Corps, they redeem themselves. And he always says it was so much worse out there.
Sickles was pretty universally hated at the time too. Now, he was a guy of the whole situation with shooting as Barton Key, that whole thing. He was somebody who he felt he got his army, but obviously he definitely got it because of politics, a political general. So the traditional people didn't like him. He was a party boy with guys like Butterfield and Hooker. He was part of that motley crew cabal, the drinkers, and that's who he was.
Didn't you say Warren was like the Nikki Sixx of the Civil War?
Well, they all were. Those guys, he was part of that group. And then you started reading the stories about how Meade was pissed off because Sickles didn't clear his wagons and it slowed the army down. All this, a lot of the post-battle stuff. But he made Sickles, he's got this impression that he's sitting there twisting his mustache, trying to find ways to screw everybody left and right. And when you study how he split his corps up, to send some men towards Gettysburg, to keep some men to protect that Union left flank. So he was kind of serving Meade and Howard, both, at the time. And if you believe the Charles Payne map, he was exactly where he was supposed to be, especially when Henry Hunt's telling him this might be an offensive. So this is the place you want to set up. So, but again, history shows that he was this guy who didn't care about rank and order, didn't care about, Meade, but they forget the fact that 5 times he sent orders back to Meade asking for clarification, and 5 times Meade didn't respond to him. So, and again, when you're studying real time in the heat of battle, and honestly, anybody who's been to where his corps was assigned, that's the obstructive use seat at Fenway, right behind the pole. You're not going to sit there. You're going to find a place. You're going to find a place to go.
But it also looks a lot like, it does remind me of Chancellorsville. And I think he had that in his head, like, oh shit, I don't want this to happen to me as well. It's kind of like, you look at these men learn from their mistakes. They remember the terrain they were on. Howard does at, when he's at Ezra Church and Sherman is getting on his ass about, he's like, why are you taking so long to set up your lines? You don't need to do that. And Howard's kind of like gently telling him, can you just let me do my thing? And the reason Howard was doing that is, and you wouldn't know it today because Ezra is in kind of a, I guess, a built up area, but Ezra reminded him of how his corps was positioned at Chancellorsville, and he was always protecting his troops as he set them up. And that was why, because he did not want another Chancellorsville. And it's a good thing he did. He ends up winning Ezra Church, but it is don't let the historical record fool you. It is a hard fight for them at Ezra.
Yeah, and a lot of that is he's also got lucky he got to fight against Hood too, who was
Stephen
off
D.
his
Lee.
game.
Stephen D. Lee,
right?
Was like, Stephen D. Lee is one of those guys. It's like, why would you put him in charge?
No, I mean, Howard's best moment was that first day at Gettysburg, setting up Cemetery Hill, because Cemetery Hill was the focus of the battle on the first day, second day, and third day. All 3 days of the Battle of Gettysburg were focused on the Confederates trying to get Cemetery Hill. That was it, and the Union trying to defend.
That was his. That was the battle. That was Howard's redemption. And unfortunately, I mean, I know MJ loves Hancock and stuff, but unfortunately, there's this thing in the, it seems like Hancock comes in and saves the day, but I don't think it matters who it is that needs.
No, the reality is the reality at that point was things were settled down by the time he got there. Of course, there's going to be the excitement and all the shit that just happened. But the reality was, Howard did a good job with the first day. He did. Mm-hmm. Now, if Reynolds had lived, how history would have played itself out, I don't know.
I think Reynolds was a little bit more aggressive than what Howard was. Howard was a lot like Thomas in that he kind of sat back and he thought about stuff a little bit more, like, is this going to be a good idea? But when he was put in charge, I think he was like, oh shit, here we go. But he did everything he had to do. I think Schurz does, for the most part, a great job in command of the 11th Corps, considering he gets, he's going to get a message that says, hi, you're in charge. Have fun.
No, he does. I mean, people, really blame Schurz, and for Howard for that matter too, was not setting up a proper retreat path to Cemetery Hill. But again, in real time, you don't expect. You're not thinking about everything. Well, you don't expect early, and you don't expect him, those guys to attack from the east. It was like, you didn't expect it.
No.
So you're also not going to set up that, and everything. Reynolds dying was very unexpected, but he was smart though to set up that defense at Cemetery Hill. That was the thing about him. He's going to leave. Steinwehr is going to stay back. Orland Smith's going to stay back. Yeah. But again, Howard is going to send guys like Coster forward during the battle to fight, to help fight and defend. So it wasn't like he sat back either and just rolled back and hid. I mean, he did what he could. He couldn't be
everywhere. He's one person and he's in charge, so he has to stay in one place so people know where to bring the messages.
And that's the thing too. personally, Reynolds seemed, he was talking about defending street by street.
Yeah.
So you would have had, my personal opinion is you would have had more street fighting in Gettysburg if he had lived. And I think that he would have done everything when Perrin's second waves coming in, Abner Perrin's guys. I think he would have helped to fight that. You would have had, I think the primary battle, the Battle of Gettysburg, probably would have been at the seminary, I think, because I think they would have set up a Gibraltar defense there. But who knows, though? That's the thing about Reynolds is no one really knows what he was going to do. When Doubleday took over after he died, he's like, I don't friggin' know. But I think he wanted to defend street by street.
Yeah.
But then he gets replaced by John Newton. So he wasn't very highly thought of either. So I don't know. I mean, that's the whole thing about him. I think that all these guys, both North and South, did the best they could with the intel they had, which wasn't much at the time.
Yeah, exactly. They're in the fog of war and they're working with what they've got. The comment from a few minutes ago is Jason said, I dislike McClellan mostly because I think he hung Pope out to dry at Manassas.
Well, I mean, he was just replaced and the Army of Virginia was put in place of not Northern Virginia, but Army of Virginia was placed in charge of John Pope. The guy who wanted that job was U.S. Grant.
Yeah.
He didn't get it because Pope wanted it and got it. But again, McClellan sat in Washington with his Army of the Potomac, and he pouted and sat there.
McClellan is a diva. I mean, I like McClellan, but my God, the guy could be a huge
diva. And then when Pope got astroglided at Second Manassas, he sat there and said, "Oh, I feel terrible about this. What a shame."
What really?
Right. And he did. And then he gets the big chair again. And they're going to converge the armies on. So he did. I mean, I don't think he went out of his way to really screw him, but I think he wasn't exactly heartbroken that he did get his ass handed to him.
But he does have that thing where he's like kind of implies, I hope he gets himself routed, which is.
Well, he did. He did. He wasn't exactly, he's like me watching a Yankees game. Yes.
That's me watching a Yankees game.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that, MJ, but it's the reality. Yeah, but that's the truth. But I think he wanted redemption. He wanted to come back. But say what you will about McClellan, he did a good job at Antietam because he slowed down that freight train that was Robert E. Lee's army, who just rolled through the 7 days, who was now fighting offensively, rolled through a Second Manassas, and now was going into Maryland with this momentum now, and he was able to push them back. So. John Pope is the reason why John Pope lost. It wasn't McClellan, the reality.
Yep. Can we say though that Antietam is partially like Jubal Early's spite march saves the day?
Well, kind of. Well, there's a lot that goes into that.
The spite march is amazing.
But John Pope didn't do himself any favors.
No. In the West, we see the backs of our enemies.
Right. He had a lot of bravado, and so a lot of that though was their mismanagement of where Stonewall Jackson was. We talk about Bronner's, where Ewell got his leg ripped off there.
Yeah.
And that's where the beginning of the Black Cats and the Iron Brigade, all that stuff that goes into Bronner's Farm and Groveton. But the reality is they were kind of, I'm not sure where they were getting their intel, because they're going to chase down this part of that Lincoln obsession with Stonewall Jackson at this time. We got to go get Jackson. Yeah. They're thinking Jackson is past Chantilly and he's sitting at Groveton.
Yeah. And
so when the Union goes in there at the beginning of the Second Manassas, they're thinking we're going to get the tail end of Jackson. They got the meat of Jackson, literally and figuratively. And so there's so much that goes into that. But John Pope was no media darling. I've yet to meet anybody who's a big John Pope fan.
I like John Pope.
But
the kid we met at Fredericksburg that was like, I like Slocum. I was like, this is so random, but I think we both told him, keep going with that because nobody studies Slocum or kind of advocates for him.
That was the most random thing. I'm a big fan of Slocum, right? Which is great.
High five that kid. He was like 20 years old and he was like, I'm like,
yeah, but he was a Notre Dame graduate though, so he's not all there. So that's part of the problem.
But the thing is like the 11th to 12th Corps are like, they're like the misfits of the Army of the Potomac, especially 11th Corps. And then they go out to the land of misfit toys in the Western Theater and they have a great time. But Slocum does prove himself to be a little bit of a diva because he gets the train ride there must have just been something else, because by the time he gets there, he writes a letter to Lincoln and says like, I am not working under Hooker, send me somewhere else. So they send him up to near Vicksburg. When Hooker leaves, they bring him back. And I do wonder sometimes, had Hooker not left, had things been different, who is going to be leading that left wing of the March to the Sea if they don't bring Slocum back? Is it going to be Blackjack Logan?
Oh, who knows?
I actually know it would not be Blackjack.
It depends. It depends who was available at the time. But
yeah,
but these things were such a musical chairs, people coming and going. I wonder if Hooker, if he regretted trying to, kind of blackmailing Washington after Chancellorsville. I'm gonna, I want the Harper's Ferry guys, or I'm taking my ball and going home. I think there was a hubris to Joe Hooker that's legendary with him.
Yeah,
and it gave Lincoln and Stanton and Halleck the perfect tool to get rid of him, put in Meade, and of course he gives them the Harper's Ferry garrison, and that's Gettysburg. But he would have been. We've said before about how Hooker, coming off of Chancellorsville, the best thing for the Union was getting rid of him at the time, because that Gettysburg campaign would have been a Union offensive. I don't know if it would have been in Gettysburg. Who knows what the hell the battle would have been.
Yeah.
But it would have been the Union fighting. I wouldn't be surprised if it was at South Mountain.
Yeah.
And the Union's going to fight an offensive going up through South Mountain. They would have got their asses handed to them. So it's funny how history is, but that's part of why we study it, is because there are so many twists and turns into this that anything you want to talk about the butterfly effect. You go back in time, and you move Joe Hooker 1 foot to the right, so he doesn't get conked in the head at the Chancellorsville house, and he stays in. How history might have changed.
Yeah, does Howard get routed?
Forget Howard. It doesn't matter about Howard, but Hooker is going to stay in charge. Now maybe he has Meade fighting offensive against Stonewall's old troops now led by Jeb Stuart, and then maybe he doesn't piss down his leg there and go out and fight Lee. So there's a million what ifs that can go into this thing with him. But the reality was, even with Howard getting routed, they could have won that battle. Yeah, they could have won it.
That's true. Actually, Howard still would have been routed no matter what. But
he was going to get routed. But a lot of his men, guys like John Newton, were livid that they retreated. Because they wanted to stay and fight. They thought they had Lee, because Lee was still spread out. He still had troops in Fredericksburg who were still coming to get him. Stoneman's cavalry fucked up, so they weren't going to be able to do much for him. No, seriously. But that was a battle that could have been turned. But Hooker, he famously said, lost confidence in Joe Hooker.
Yeah.
And then it led to him leaving. And when you look at the early part of what became the Gettysburg campaign, his subordinates complained. Now you got guys like Sykes, right? That we don't know where the hell we're going. We're a rudderless ship. He's sending out those balloons, kind of like that China balloon, trying to find the Confederates, and they can't find them. And it was Oliver Otis Howard, of all people, who found the Confederates.
Yeah,
who was able to finally find them.
Well, that's the one the one thing the 11th Corps doesn't get talked about a lot with them is when they are in the Eastern Theater, a lot of what they do is they do a lot of scouting. They're good at spying. And they're good at the espionage thing, and Howard is often the one that gets tasked with that, and he is good at that, and his men are.
No, but if you're a Union guy, Hooker going out was the best thing that ever happened, because who knows how history could have changed after that. Meade was the right guy at the right time, is what it was.
Meade, to me, he deserves to be up there with Grant and Sherman, because he's a very different type of general, but I think he's equally talented, but in different ways. This is a guy who has the worst first day on the job, actually worst first week on the job. You get put in charge, you don't know where your fucking army is. And then it's like, oh, all of a sudden we're doing a battle. Okay, here we go. And he does so well at it. He gives them he gives the Union Army the victory they need with the Army of the Potomac that was made by McClellan and Hooker.
He did as good of a job as you can imagine, but again, he has his detractors too about Gettysburg, which I think is kind of unfair. Gelzo looking at you, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it was. But he had a situation where he was lucky, and one of the smarter things he did was keeping Dan Butterfield as chief of staff.
Well, he had no choice.
Well, he didn't have to, but he could have just said, I'm not dealing with any of these guys. I'm going to replace Sickles. I'm going to replace Butterfield. He could have wiped them all out immediately. But he needed that conduit to Hooker because Hooker was on a friggin' train the second this was done. He was not going to offer them any support whatsoever. Of course, he's going to end up going west and finding a Lookout Mountain and all that shit. He's going to stick around. But when you look at that specific beginning of that campaign, when Lee had every advantage and Hooker was on his heels completely, it's actually a miracle it turned out the way it did. And I think the only reason why it did was because of Lee's aggressiveness. I think Lee's overconfidence got the best of him.
Big time. Yeah.
You know, he had Pickett's men, but he didn't have Pickett's entire division. He had to leave some of them back.
Yeah.
He lost control of guys like Isaac Trimble, and he lost guys like Henry Heath, where they Leroy Jenkins it in based on intel they got from guys like J. Johnson Pettigrew. So a lot of the things that happened was I think the battle came upon Lee unsuspecting. And let's be honest, it's the only battle I can think of where the two men, where they met on the march, they bumped into each other.
Yeah.
And that was one where, and people overstate Gettysburg, and I get all that. The military significance of Gettysburg was not that significant, but it was the political and psychological advantage of Gettysburg. The Union loses Gettysburg. That's going to be a real crimp in the dick of Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, big time.
It's going to be. But again, nothing against the Vicksburg people, because Vicksburg was way more important militarily, as was Antietam was.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they could not afford to lose that. They had to win. It was in Meade would have. I don't want to say he was the only guy who could have been there, but I think if Hooker was there, I'm not sure they win. Wherever the hell that battle takes place, it's going to take place somewhere in Pennsylvania or Maryland. Who knows if it's Gettysburg? But at the same time, Hooker would have been, when they did meet, he would have been over aggressive. But I think Hooker would have been slow to get there too. I think only Meade gets his army across the Potomac as fast as he did. So who knows? That's what's fun about it. That's what's fun to talk about this stuff, you know?
Oh, it is. Yeah. And I think, speaking of Vicksburg, I think that is one of the more strategic victories in the Civil War because of it opens up the Mississippi. I do think it's interesting how Lincoln is so quick to praise Grant after Grant takes 9 months to take the place, but then he's so critical of Meade. And I think that goes back to Lincoln in some ways is like Jeff Davis. He has his favorites that he turns a blind eye to certain things they do. Grant is definitely one of them. Grant, I think after a certain point could do no wrong in Lincoln's eyes.
Well, Grant was a fighter. The thing you can say about Lincoln all along is he always said, I like him. He fights.
Yep.
And he wanted an aggressive type of guy. I mean, look at chicks love the long ball, right? Same deal. That's the old commercial there, the baseball commercial for ESPN. You want a guy who's going to fight. You don't want a passive guy. When you look at when he gave order, like I said earlier, to McClellan, to Rosecrans, I'm going to put you in charge. I want you to fight. And this all goes back to McClellan, who in his mind was slow.
Yeah.
But after Bull Run, the first one, not Bull Run 2, the search for Curly's gold, the first one, right? That he realized that they were not ready for prime time yet.
Yep.
So he had to prepare them. And Lincoln was go, 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 go. But Lincoln had a very unfortunate, ability to read. He overstated his army, where men equaled victory, where you had to be prepared. And that's the thing about it was, there's been 9 billion books written about Lincoln. Okay.
But I can't need to be anymore.
But I can't think of any that talk about how much he meddled in the Union Army.
He did. And I think he finally realized it when Grant, after Gettysburg, when he was going to send that letter to Meade. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say where Jefferson Davis would, given his choice, would rather be a general in the Confederate the Army versus the president, given his druthers. That would have been his choice.
Yeah.
I think that Lincoln, we look specifically at the Peninsula Campaign, right? Where he's going to take Irvin McDowell away from McClellan to go chase Stonewall in the woods. Yeah. And he's going to lose a bunch of men right at that point when Lee is going to take over on June 1st, 62. And he's going to turn that defensive peninsula into an offensive 7 days. Yeah. And now McClellan doesn't have the men. and he's going to have to, he's going to get forced back, and it's going to get that perception that McClellan failed because he was so close to Richmond, right?
Yeah.
And so there's so many things about that where I think that if he would have stayed back and let the generals be generals, he's like the Jerry Jones of the NFL. He just needs to stay the friggin' hell away.
Yeah.
Where if he just lets his team play and not meddle, they'll have more success.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to see a book about that personally.
Yep.
And I like Lincoln. I'm not going to lie. I like Lincoln.
Same.
But at the same time, there's a pattern with him
Mm-hmm.
where he certainly puts his nose in to the military way more than he had to.
Yeah.
Which I think threw barriers in front of these people. I think with McClellan, Meade, all of them, they're trying to run a race.
You look at Reynolds, who is offered the position to command the Army of the Potomac, and he said, "Are you going to just let me have free reign and do what I want?" And Lincoln's like, "No." And Reynolds is like, "Then I don't want to do it," because and I mean, rightly so. These are the guys that they've went to West Point. They've been the ones fighting. They've been doing all this shit for how many years, right? You don't want somebody sitting in Washington telling you what you have to do. But I think it really hit Lincoln after he realized, when he wrote that letter to Meade that he thankfully never sent. I think he realized, like, holy shit, maybe I really don't know what's going on, because I think he realized, like, wow, what's happening to Meade with, lack of horses is the same thing McClellan was talking about. Maybe there's something here. Maybe I need to stay out.
Well, his attitude, and you still see it today because people know about his letter, the post Gettysburg retreat. And if you read Masters and Brown's brilliant Retreat from Gettysburg, which I still say is the best book about Gettysburg,
it is.
And as far as any battle, you can take your Fonz, you can take your Trudeau, you can take your Coddington, throw them out the window. His Retreat from Gettysburg is the best book about the Battle of Gettysburg written, in my opinion. He doesn't just talk about the retreat; he sets up the battle. But people don't realize. I mean, people here do, but the perception is Pickett's charge happens in the third. They shake hands, good team, good game, walk away. The stuff that happened after that, and this is, and I've said this before. Robert E. Lee's greatest moment is the Retreat from Gettysburg.
Yeah.
And people say, well, Gettysburg was a disaster for the Confederacy. And I know it wasn't. The battle was. The campaign was a gigantic victory. They had 40 miles worth of wagons full of supplies.
Yeah, that's exactly what they needed. It was a shopping trip for them.
That supplied the Army of Northern Virginia for the rest of 1863. Without those supplies, they were screwed. And so when you look at that whole thing, was the battle a success for Confederacy? No, but the campaign certainly was.
Oh yeah, big time.
But so Meade did not sit back and do nothing during that retreat. He did everything possible. But why the hell would you double down after this victory you had to have when you think that Lee is setting up a defense in the South Mountain Range? Mm-hmm. And you're not going to go attack that. Now we know he was retreating now, but back then they didn't know. Don't forget, Lee was Mr. Aggressive at this point.
Exactly.
And Meade was like, Lee had this cult of personality then that he still has now. How the hell do you think you're going to go at them? And, why didn't you chase them down after the battle? Well, Lee still had 10,000 plus healthy troops ready to go. Yeah. You're not going to do a reverse Pickett's charge. There's a lot of that.
No, and you're not going to take your broken army where you've lost corps commanders, be they dead or wounded. You don't have the horses to pull your artillery and your supply trains. You're not going to do that. And I think, Lincoln wrote that letter, and then it was Howard had no idea he'd written a letter because it was never Lincoln.
Howard
never published. Howard. Yep. Are you going to take a drink? Howard wrote that letter because he was reading stuff in the papers, and he finally wrote a letter to Lincoln and said, like, okay, this is how it is here right now. Like, we're broken for this reason. Meade is doing a really great job, and you need to do something about, like, how the press is kind of slamming him. And I sometimes wonder if that letter had some kind of impact on Lincoln in kind of jolting him into this, like, oh shit, like, maybe I really don't understand what's going on.
No, I mean, it was good he didn't send that letter, but at the same time, the fact that he wrote it, just goes kind of showed ignorance on his part. The worst thing Meade could have done is gone full banana into chasing Lee down, because he could have walked into a trap. What happens if Lee sets up the mounts? Because don't forget, Lee set up all those campfires, those breastworks to make it look like, what if he stayed there and just waited for the Union to come? Because in Bowdoin, the cavalry guy, he talks a lot about how they were fighting rear guard action the whole time against Buford and against Kilpatrick and guys like that. How that would have been if they kept going and going and going. And if Lee had set up that defense in the mountain range and waited for them to attack, you're going up a mountain in the rain, fighting against an entrenched defensive position. So Lee could have set up there and he could have waited, but he didn't. So there's so much that goes into this, but it's good he didn't send that letter. But I still think Lee getting that army, the injured, and more importantly, all the supplies over the Potomac through Williamsport there. Yeah. I think personally that in Chancellorsville is his greatest moment, but that doesn't happen. If those wagons get bagged in Monterey Pass, it almost happened. Lee's army's done. They're done as a fighting force, because it doesn't matter how many men you have. You're not going to have any supplies. And now we had enough supplies to sustain them for the rest of 1863, which led into 1864. And that's what obviously it didn't work out well at the end of the day for Lee when the big picture, but that allowed them to live for the rest of the day and just fighting for another day.
They're not really able to get supplies in 1864 because Sheridan goes in and he does complete hell to the Valley, which in my opinion, Sheridan, what he does in the Valley is far worse than anything Sherman does in Georgia. And nobody talks about that, and I mean, I get it. You got to end the war somehow, but Sheridan in the Valley, he's a fucking asshole.
Oh no, he is. But again, he's doing what he feels he has to do himself. The Valley was a breadbasket of the Confederacy. It certainly was. And Cedar Creek certainly was a moment for him, and it allowed them to kind of set that cult of personality. And there's that story, he's sitting there where he's firing the cigar up, watching the things burn. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can like or hate anybody, but these guys dealt with the exigencies of the moment. Yeah, right. And that's what he did.
Yeah, Mike mentions he's reading Meade at Gettysburg, and he says it's a very good book. That's another of our favorites too.
That's a good call. If you take Meade at Gettysburg and the Retreat of Gettysburg, put them together into one book, it's perfect. Yeah. Meade at Gettysburg does a great job setting up the beginning of the Battle of Gettysburg. It talks about what the hell was Reynolds doing, what was Buford doing, right? Mm-hmm. It talks about that part of it. And the Retreat talks about the post. Now, everyone knows the middle part of the actual battle, those 3 days in July. But setting up those beginning and the ends, it's a huge thing. And Brown does, and he's a friend of the podcast, a good guy. We've had him on a few times.
Oh, he's awesome.
He's a good dude, and he's somebody who knows his stuff. Although he is very anti-Sickles, which I'm not a big fan of.
Which is fine. I mean, I'm team Sickles too, but I have to say, if you're looking to get into battles, there are some books that are great places to start. And I would say for Battle of Gettysburg, the three that I would recommend are The Retreat and Meade at Gettysburg by Kent Masterson Brown, but also Trudeau's Gettysburg for a good overall picture of the battle, because he talks a lot.
It's a good beginner's book. It's a good beginner's. People here have probably read all this shit, but if people always say, if I want to read about the Battle of Gettysburg, what's the best book to read? Trudeau's Gettysburg is the best, because it's not nuts and bolts like a lot of the other ones. I lot of soldier stories, which is I would say read Trudeau first, then read Stephen Sears, because he does more of the campaign. He talks a lot about he talks a lot about this leading up to it. He talks about second Winchester. He talks about all the battles that led into Gettysburg. Then if you're still into it, right, that's when you get into the hardcore stuff. You get into the Coddington level, which is like stereo instructions. If you're going to study for the battlefield guide exam, that's the one you want to read, because it's tight. Fonz's books, I think, are the best books at all as far as that goes. Especially when you're talking about Culp's Hill, without a question.
To really drill down into it. And I have to say, just because we like to be balanced and whatever, but for the Western theater, anybody in Chickamauga, which is, that's my favorite battle. Dave Powell has a really, really great trilogy about Chickamauga, because Chickamauga is just, to me, is equally fascinating as Gettysburg. You get to go there in April with me. That'll be a fun time. Dave
There'll be
Powell's
beer, I promise.
Yep. Dave Powell's got a really great trilogy about it, but Dave Powell also has written books about the battles for Chattanooga, which are kind of they're like Chickamauga 2.0. So he's got one on Lookout Mountain, he's got one on Missionary Ridge, and as well as Ringgold Gap, which are the battles for Chattanooga. I do lump Ringgold Gap in the battles for Chattanooga. But Dave Powell's got really great books about that. If you're looking for something about Vicksburg, Tim Smith is releasing like a 3-volume series about it, I think.
Not Miller?
Well, Tim Smith has the 3 volumes about it that he's releasing, but for me, the best book about Vicksburg is by Donald L. Miller.
Yeah.
That is such a good book. And Winston Groom has written one too, but Donald L. Miller's book about Vicksburg is really great too. It's and he goes way back, to the Cenozoic era or whatever with it, just like Winston Groom does. They go back to the beginning, but they talk about how they're trying to take Vicksburg, the Navy's trying to take it and they can't do it.
Vicksburg's a great book. Sorry, go ahead.
Jim mentions he's doing some Civil War book enabling. I just finished reading The Last Slave Ship, the true story of how Clotilda was found, her descendants, and an extraordinary reckoning by Ben Raines. And Jim has an amazing Civil War book collection. He'll be on our roundtables and be like, I have that book, and you can just reach for it.
He's like that. It's so funny with Jim. He's sitting there in the roundtables. He has that author at home look about him, where he sits there with all the books behind him. All he needs is a pipe and a big jacket.
That's what Jim needs. Like that now.
So Jim, that's your homework assignment for the next time. Get a pipe and get a big jacket and just sit there with all those books behind you with your big fucker signs. There you go. you'll have it all. So,
but he'll just reach behind and be like, I have that book right here.
He's like, oh, you want volume 3 of blah, blah, blah? Well, matter of fact, books that I do, which is saying something.
Which is amazing. He's got an amazing collection. Between him and Bjorn, who works at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, we have we're set for Civil War book enabling. But yeah, Jim says about that book he mentioned, The Last Slave Ship, can't say enough about it. It's absolutely spellbinding. So yeah.
No, there's a lot of great books and history out there. And it's great that people like Jim and other people push these books, because a lot of people don't even know about these books. And those are the best books, though. They are. And be honest, people don't study this stuff the way people do, on this chat, right? And that's what's great about it.
Oh yeah,
the Civil War is one of those subjects where you can be self-educated, where as much as we can appreciate the PhD people, the Carmichaels of the world.
And there's some amazing PhD people out there that are really awesome people.
But some of the smartest people I know in the Civil War, who we know, aren't PhDs.
Yep.
And you know what? We drink beer with them too, which is fun too. And and some of them will completely admit that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about half the time.
Yeah, I don't. Okay. I really don't.
Trying to do the voice of one of my friends. Yeah. But the reality is you can study this stuff. And what's great about this too is that your opinion is just as good as anybody else's.
Yeah.
It just is. And if you read more about it, you can realize that and the people put the effort that MJ puts in, for example. Yeah. Right. It's I commend
Andrea
that,
Quinn with studying Barlow.
Andrea, but but seriously though, because do you know how much, especially for you guys, for you, Andrea, MJ, some of the people who are the female gender, to put yourselves out there in this field and open yourself up to the scrutiny you do and the bullshit you deal with, then bravo to all you guys. Yeah. Because
all I will say is I am a female who enjoys studying military history. I always have been, and anybody that is females don't like to study that, including other females that have said that. Right. I love studying military history. I always have.
No, but that's what makes it great though, is that you can sit there and put your opinion forward, read about your opinion, hold firm to your opinion, but be malleable to your opinion. So allow for change. And so it allows you to be a better historian. And you don't need to be a PhD to call yourself a historian. Okay. No. That's the gatekeeper world we live in.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I 100% agree. And I mean, we met a lot of great people through doing this podcast. We're about to drop episode 100 a week from today. And then also to anybody in the Gettysburg area on February 18th. So 2 weeks from today, 1:00 at Fourscore Brewing, we are going to be doing a hangout just to celebrate our 100th episode and just celebrate the podcast. And I know there's obviously people that can't be there, but we appreciate you just as much as anybody that can, because this is why we're here. We wouldn't be here without our listeners.
No, absolutely. So that'll be fun. So we get ready to sign off here. It's almost noontime. It's almost, I think it's almost 1 degree out. The heat wave is kicking in here, but no, so that's great. So people keep doing what they're doing. And that's the whole thing is, you keep pushing the envelope, keep pissing people off, keep challenging people's beliefs. And that's great too. Yeah.
Cause if you're pissing people off, you're doing something right. Just in my opinion, in the Civil War field, because it's like, everything is really just an opinion, because we don't 100% know what happened. I mean, we don't 100% know that Rosecrans had PTSD, for example, but I think he did.
Well, I mean, study it, say what you believe in, but don't let anybody tell you you're wrong. Don't be intimidated by it, because there's too much of that shit. It just is. This field is dominated by old white men, right? It is. Okay. And don't be afraid to pee in the pool once in a while and change the narrative, and just stick with your beliefs and keep fighting. So I think of you, I think of MJ, I think of Andrea, I think of
Lisa as well,
Samia, people like that. And I realize that, you know what, you're doing it. Yeah. And so what, you may not realize the impact you're all making, but you're making an impact. You are.
Well, thank you.
You are. So God bless all you guys. But anyway, let's jump off. So let's get ready to go. And so we are going to drop the episode of Alexander Rose next week, which I promise is a good one. And you're going to hear a lot of British accents, because he goes the whole time. But
that's awesome, though. It's like,
it's great. It's great.
Book is awesome.
The book is great. And so we will to do that. So we'll get that dropped next week. In 2 weeks from this very moment, Mary, we'll be getting ready for our meet and greet at the Fourscore, which hopefully people can come to. We are going to be in Gettysburg the entire weekend. So if you can't make the meet and greet, I know some people, MJ has her living history. Yeah. I know, I think Matt's doing his winter lecture, I think that day. So at that time. So, but I think people who are around, definitely love to the people we haven't met, people we have, we'd love to get a beer with you, hang out and talk this shit, nerd out the Civil War. So whether it be the Mine, whether it be Fourscore, whether it be ABC, we'll look forward to hanging out.
We'll be in town all weekend. So, and we'll probably be at, Jason said, second time here for me and enjoying it immensely. No, thank you, Jason. Yeah. Always love when new people come on and comment. That's good to know.
No, it's fun, because you know something, you can like the North, you can like the South, you do you. Like who you want, and just hold firm to it, but keep an open mind, because your opinion may change based on different things. But don't let anybody tell you you're wrong. The hell with that. Just go ahead and fling it. Like I always tell you, Mary, just fling it.
Yeah. Right? Well, Ski says he'll be there, and Caleb said he'll see us at Gettysburg in July.
Oh, good. So we'll be there. We'll definitely be there on the anniversary too.
Yeah.
That'll be a lot of fun. But we'll definitely try to catch up as many people as we can. So anyway, so off we go. So guys, have a great day. Stay warm. Hopefully you have a good day. It's beautiful here, but it's friggin' freezing. So we're gonna go down, take a walk by the water, and go see the sea mist here in a little while. Go check that out. All right, guys. So anyway, so episode next week. Book club's coming up. Gettysburg is in 2 weeks. So off we go. So Mary, as always, the pleasure was all yours, and everybody else. We will look forward to talking to you later.